The possibility of an extra playoff. For Saturday's decisive match, it was a no-nonsense squad that manager Trapattoni assembled in Florence.
Ci sono momenti in cui si possono chiamare i giovani e fare delle valutazioni, sono momenti in cui sono necessari chi è abituato, nervi saldi. È chiaro che noi abbiamo dei giocatori che non ho scartato in partenza, perché i vari Giuliano, i vari Di Biagio, tanto per fare dei nomi, Albertini che poi era infortunato, sono giocatori che sono sempre stati presenti nella mia mente.
Okay, and last thing, Italy will be going to the World Cup, yes?
I think.
Well, bring on the Magyars then. Saturday night, the Tardini Stadium in Parma was the venue, and this report from Gary Bloom.
It was the ever-impressive Francesco Totti who created the Azzurri's first clear-cut chance. Pippo Inzaghi squandered a gilt-edged opportunity midway through the first half. Zambrotta should have done better too. Inzaghi, incidentally, was covering for the injured Christian Vieri. Shortly afterwards, Totti's vision was once again in evidence. This time Del Piero was picked out by the Roma playmaker, but the Juventus star was way off target, and the fans' cries for the excluded Roberto Baggio grew increasingly louder. Still unruffled by the Parma crowd, Del Piero managed to redeem himself on the stroke of half-time as his perfectly executed free kick finally put the Azzurri ahead. He struck his 16th international goal to equal Gianluca Vialli's tally for Italy. After the interval, Italy were expected to build on their lead, but missed a succession of chances. Totti, played in by Del Piero, was denied on 52 minutes. By the time Inzaghi wasted another goal-scoring opportunity, Del Piero had been replaced as Trapattoni looked to shore things up by adding an extra midfielder. In fact, it was a substitute, Rino Gattuso, who started the move that led to Damiano Tomasi almost doubling the Azzurri's advantage. Indeed, the Roma man had found the net in Italy's previous international against Morocco. Hungary survived and came close themselves soon after. Ferenczi had been on the field just 10 minutes when he fired over. Italy hardly covered themselves in glory in the closing stages. Another chance fell to Ferenczi moments later, but once again he failed to make it count, and Italy managed to preserve their slender lead and book their place for next year's World Cup. It wasn't exactly an inspiring performance from Trapattoni's side, but it was only the result that mattered in this one. Italy are off to the World Cup.
Siamo al mondiale. Abbiamo faticato in tutta la qualificazione, però siamo al mondiale.
Siamo al mondiale, direi un grande merito, un grande elogio ai ragazzi, si soffre. Del resto vediamo costantemente, quotidianamente come soffrono tutti. Abbiamo visto oggi anche dei risultati che sembravano ormai scontati.
Per te ancora un mondiale, hai raccontato che potrebbe essere l'ultimo con la maglia azzurra, però dacci una valutazione, questa nazionale rispetto a quelle altre che hai vissuto e che ti hanno portato al mondiale, è realmente quella con maggiori possibilità di vincere?
Beh, credo che assieme a quella del 94, ma anche quella del 90, è difficile secondo me non trovare una nazionale che sia andata al mondiale senza puntare alla vittoria, quindi questa mi sembra particolarmente forte, perché il gruppo è lo stesso dell'Europeo, dove siamo arrivati secondi per un soffio, e di conseguenza qualche giocatore è anche maturato, quelli vecchi non sono invecchiati troppo. Mi sembra che ci sia l'armonia giusta.
Well, plenty of optimism there among the Italy squad on Saturday night. Well, with the cake now having arrived, time now to get an early look at the week's papers here on Gazzetta, starting off, of course, with their reaction to Saturday's result. Now, with Italy having dragged qualifications out for months and months, the papers had a tough time getting overly excited about the Hungary game. Still, Corriere had a go on Sunday morning to the World Cup, the headline there. Tutti con Totti, and Francesco there in a very fashionable bandana. Rather more muted over in the Gazzetta dello Sport, Totti, Del Piero to the World Cup with fancy, they say, and the Italians there sharing the front page with, look, Sir David of Beckham. As for manager Trapattoni's suggestion that Italy will be among the favourites next summer, well, the papers here agree, with 2 points emerging for them from the games so far. One, Italy absolutely must find some new wingers, plus a backup for the permanently injured Christian Vieri. Two, on a lighter note, Francesco Totti has the potential to become the star of Career Japan. Indeed, Saturday night, Trapattoni declaring that the 25-year-old is now reaching the levels of Rivera and Platini. Cripes. Well, beyond all of that, though, the really big talking point here in Italy post the Hungary match is Roberto Baggio's will-he, won't-he national team comeback. Baggio, of course, is bidding for a place in the next World Cup squad. He's been backed by months of pressure from the Italian papers and, as we heard earlier, was invoked loudly on Saturday night by the crowd at the Tardini too. Now, before the game, Trapattoni had finally admitted that Roberto is among the 35 players from which he'll pick his World Cup group. Post-game, though, the manager was so heartily sick of the subject that he's officially banned any mention of the ponytail one until May. Both Totti and Del Piero are already grumbling about all the Baggio fuss, and Trapp's keen not to ruffle their delicate feathers. Nice for Roberto that at 35 years of age, he still causes panic, even if it is among his own teammates. Well, we'll be hearing from Bobby on his hopes of slipping through the trapdoor later on in today's show. Right now, though, on to the week's other news. Item 2 and Venezia have fired their coach Cesare Prandelli. The club, lying bottom of the table in Serie A, made the move having lost all 5 of their opening matches. As Venezia's volcanic president Maurizio Zamparini explains, the manager lacked all faith in our survival. Prandelli's reaction, it's a bolt from the blue, making him the only man in Italy who didn't see this one coming, as Zamparini is in fact the Serie A record holder for firing coaches. 17 he's been through in 14 years in charge, and that, remember, is a figure kept artificially low by his habit of reusing the same man more than once. Clever. Well, next in the Venezia hot seat is a 2-man team, which should help boost the president's numbers shortly. Unofficially, the new coach will be Beppe Iachini, a 37-year-old ex-Venezia player. However, since he's still unqualified, he'll have to be accompanied by the ex-Bologna manager, Sergio Buso. Anyway, with Venezia sinking deeper than a German philosopher, clue it's an accent joke, we move on now to another manager in trouble, Carlo Mazzoni. Mazzoni, manager of Brescia, this week was banned from the touchline for a whopping 5 matches. This after his behaviour 2 weeks ago, when enraged by abuse from visiting Atalanta fans, Serie A's oldest coach, he's 64 you know, barreled buffalo-like down towards their stand, shouting and waving his fists. This week, scared judges called his antics a serious threat to public order, really, and thus suspended him until the 25th of November, by which time he may even have got his breath back. Still, it's a bit rich, says the Gazzetta dello Sport, amongst other papers, when just 3 weeks ago, Edgar Davids, for example, was banned for only 2 games for even worse behaviour, punching an opponent. Have a go, Grandad. Mazzoni, though, isn't arguing. I asked for it, he says, and I won't be appealing. Get off my lawn. Well, on then to item 4, and an early return to Serie A for Inter's Alvaro Recoba. Probably. The Uruguayan is currently serving a 1-year ban for possession of a fake Italian passport. The ban, which doesn't apply to international matches, was due to end on the 27th of June 2002. But in the light of other recent reductions, Inter have made what looks like a successful challenge. This Monday, indeed, the Italian FA agreed in principle to Inter's proposal that Alvaro's suspension should be cut in return for him doing some community service, you know, with kids. Exactly how much reduction, if any, Recoba gets was still being decided as this show was being put together, but estimates are that he could now be allowed back from as early as the end of this month. Says the Uruguayan, it's a nerve-wracking wait, but I'm optimistic. We should have the confirmation of the exact date of his return in next Saturday morning's show, or if you absolutely can't wait, try tapping into the news section of our Football Italia website. Well, on then anyway to item 5, and it's all over for Mario Kempes at Fiorenzuola. The former Argentine World Cup hero thrilled viewers on Gazzetta a few weeks back, turning up at this tiny Italian 3rd division club. He'd been hired to manage a team composed almost entirely of imported Latin Americans, and with a man who looked like Batistuta among them, it was a brilliant plan. Sadly though, the Italian mastermind financing Super Mario has now lost his battle for control of Fiorenzuola, and thus, having spent the last 2 months standing by in a local bed and breakfast, the entire Latin enclave has had to pack up and go home. We'll never forget them. Well, lastly then for this morning, Patrick Vieira and his groovy Juve move. Last Sunday, the France and Arsenal midfielder announced to the English press that he wanted to join Juventus, inviting the Turin giants to make him an offer. This is presumably not the same Patrick Vieira that last year declared he'd never go back to racist Serie A. Well, the papers here this week quickly filled with talk of this deal, with word indeed that Vieira could arrive here in Turin as soon as January in exchange for Juve's Edgar Davids and around £8 million. However, no way, say Juve. Vieira, I'm not stupid, says their Director General, I'm keeping Davids. Certainly this makes sense. Apart from the fact Juve couldn't use Vieira in the Champions League this season, there's also word here in Turin that the club are confident of signing the Frenchman come the end of this season anyway, without Arsenal poaching Edgar. Poaching Edgar, hey! Well, more to come perhaps on that story next week, but meantime, that's it for this morning's news roundup. Next up, indeed, in part one, a man who once pushed my face in a plate of spaghetti. Not that that narrows it down terribly much. With the return of Gigi Casiraghi, here's Johnny Gould.